This is Authentic.
Welcome back to the Test Pilot series. I'm your host, Sunshine Sinclair. Last episode, Knockers stepped us through the developmental and integrated testing of the Super Hornet. Required by law under Title 10 of the U.S. Code, the third and final stage of testing is operational test, or OT. Moving away from developmental testing of design requirements, the aircraft is now handed over solely to fleet operators with strong tactical backgrounds that evaluate the aircraft in the context of operationally representative missions in realistic environments against current and credible threats. Today's guest, a fellow Pennsylvanian, retired Navy Captain Eric Snake Venema, has a wealth of operational and combat experience. Top Gun Maverick's story could have easily been fashioned after Snake's. Both started their fleet careers in the venerable F-14 and graduated from Top Gun. While assigned to VF-84 Jolly Rogers, he flew combat missions in Operation Provide Promise, Deny Flight, and Southern Watch. After his combat experience, he was assigned to VX-9 to evaluate the Super Hornet. After a successful test and evaluation tour, he went on to command the VFA 151 Vigilantes and led them through combat operations in both Iraq and Afghanistan. He has earned a Bronze Star and 5 air medals. Needless to say, he's got some great stories about combat and test. So let's get to it. Good morning, Snake.
Hey, good morning, Shine. Merry Christmas. Belated.
Merry Christmas.
All right.
Hey, Snake, so if you don't mind, before we dive into OT, we're going to talk about your background, an idea of why they call you Snake, which is obviously much cooler than Sunshine. And then talk about, some of the highlights, if you will. So where are you from originally?
Oh, so I'm from Pennsylvania, out where you used to live, close by in Westchester, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, West. Okay, so kind of for our friends not familiar with PA, that's over by Philly, right? Just north of Philly?
Yeah, just kind of actually a little west of Philly. Yep.
West of Philly, excuse me.
Yep.
All right, so right on the border there with Jersey.
Yeah.
Nice. And then when it comes to Snake, so you got a story for us?
Not a very exciting one, but you go through flight school, you keep your mouth shut, you don't do stupid things, and you get a call sign. And what you get sticks, and you never fight it. Those are the basic rules. So I showed up at I think I got this when I was in VF 101. No, I was down in flight school. I was in flight school in A4s, and guy I remember was Sparks Bauer, F-14 guy. He looked at my name. He was like, "Venema, we got to get you a cool sign like Snake Bite or Rattler or something like that." So it was Snake Bite. I'm like, "Oh, okay, sounds good." I'm not choosing this. You are choosing for me. And so it got shortened up to the Snake, and it stuck. And I didn't do some great feat of nonsense to earn myself a new one over the years. So pretty benign story.
Yeah. So, but it was resilient. We'll call it the call sign. You didn't, like you said, didn't get changed throughout the fleet. So
yeah.
That's pretty good. I don't know many dudes that have kept their call signs, honestly, from the RAG.
Yeah, well, from flight school.
Or from flight school, excuse me. So good on you, man.
Yeah, my grandmom hated it. She says, "My grandson is not a snake," but I had to explain to her it was a term of endearment.
Well, and when you see that plastered on the side of a jet, I mean, that's a little more menacing than, say, I don't know, mine, so that's good.
Yeah. For a while, they tried like garter snake or something like that. Yeah. But I have an interesting last name. You can read the perturbations of it, Venema. So I consider myself lucky with my call sign.
I hear you, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
Me too. The dumb things that I did, fortunately, weren't strong enough, we'll say, to overcome the Sunshine thing. So that kind of worked out. So, all right, Snake, you grew up in PA, you talked about Westchester, and then where'd you go to school?
So I went to Drexel University in Philadelphia. I went there on an ROTC scholarship, NROTC. So I was crosstown enrolled in the ROTC program at University of Pennsylvania. And literally those two campuses are one block apart. You cross over Walnut Street, heading south, and you're in Penn campus. You go north, you're in Drexel's campus. So the ROTC unit there, we had Penn and we had Drexel and a couple other smaller schools around the Philadelphia area. We had Villanova. They had their own ROTC program out there, farther towards Westchester. And then I think Rutgers was in our program, maybe Temple as well. So a bunch of schools all just coming down to University of Pennsylvania there, down on South Street, the Hollenbeck Center, old building. Yeah.
So Drexel University, I think of, so being from Pennsylvania myself, I think of that as a very strong engineering school. So I'm assuming that you're more of a math science guy than, say, art history?
So I'm not art history, but I'm not a pure engineer. I got my degree in commerce and engineering. So it was a kind of a hybrid major there. Started out mechanical engineering, didn't really enjoy it, so shifted in my second year there to like this commerce engineering. So I took all the core engineering courses, statics, dynamics, thermodynamics, calc. Didn't do difficult equations. That was good, DiffyQ. But we did, on the other side, we did business. So I specialized in finance and in the business half of that major, marketing, accounting. So a little bit of jack of all trades in that one, and then became a naval officer.
Nice. And so the reason I ask is because as a test pilot, you don't have to be just a math science kind of guy. And I think you're case in point, right? Because you had a very influential time in VX9 and the operational test squadron at China Lake. And do you think you were surrounded by a lot of engineers, or was there a good mix of academics?
I was surrounded by just a great bunch of really, really smart people. I'll talk about it a little later, but, guys like Ken Ham, astronaut, Scott Tingle, astronaut, Dave Dunaway, future NavAir commander, Jeff Penfield. So just really, really smart, hardworking guys. And I learned more than I taught from them. But as an operational test pilot, we're not graduates of test pilot school. Some of us were, but I wasn't. So, that's really the true benefit of an operational test pilot is you bring your fleet experience to the test program, right? So the DT guys, VX-23 folks, test pilot school graduates do the really hard, performance work, flight characteristics, flutter, vibe, all that stuff that you do. And then they hand the aircraft over to the operational testers, and we put it into a realistic testing environment, of simulated operational conditions, combat conditions, close air support, air-to-air warfare, surface warfare, carrier qualifications, working in the carrier environment. So it's that blend of DT experience, the test pilot guys, the aerodynamics majors, and then the operational test guys of all flavors, really, for the Super Hornet at this time, because it was a brand new airplane, right? It's going from, Tomcat squadrons are being decommissioned. The A6 squadrons are all gone. So we had Hornet drivers, we had Tomcat drivers, Rios, A6 pilots, A6BNs, smattering of Air Force a little bit in there as well. So a bunch of different experience that really came to bear for OT of the Super Hornet.
Yeah, and then you had mentioned fleet experience. So we talked about your academics. Now tell us about, you went to Top Gun, right? You flew the F-14. Tell us all about the platforms and the experiences you did have in the fleet that led up to this Rhino or Super Hornet OT.
Okay, I got winged in 1993. And that was a point where there was a big backup in the production at the fleet replacement squadrons. We used to call them the RAGs, replacement air groups. So VF 101 in Oceania was where I was slated to go, but I had a year delay between starting the FRS, the Tomcat RAG here, and then from my winging. So a year between when I got my wings and when I started. So I kind of organized myself a job, if you will. So they were stashing people everywhere. Some guys actually got their wings and they sent them to ship's company for 3 years. Cool. So it was a glut of folks. My roommate when I was a department head got one of those jobs, but did great work afterwards. So I found a job at VF 43, which was the adversary squadron here at Oceania. And I did odd jobs for them. Was their NATOPS officer, was their, go-to fix everything in the ready room woodworking guy, and spent my free time going over to the simulators at the F-14 simulator. Got a ton of hours in that thing. I had a year's worth of simulators, and then flying in F-16Ns, F-5Fs, and A4s, doing adversary work. So VF-43 was the adversary squadron Oceania. So we had a program used to be called FARP, which was the air-to-air program during workups that all the Tomcat squadrons went through. So had a year just hanging out with adversary drivers, learning how the Tomcat worked in the simulator, fighting those guys in the air, albeit from the back seat, learning and observing. And then I finally got to start the FRS about a year later. So took about a year to go through the FRS at the Tomcat Squadron VF-101, the Grim Reapers, which I think is F-35s now, if I'm not mistaken, or they were down in Eglin.
Yeah, 101.
Yep. And then got finished that program, CQ'd. 2 weeks later, I'm on deployment with VF-84 Jolly Rogers in Bosnia-Herzegovina. So went pretty quick. So it's Pri A, which means you're going to a squadron that's going to deploy immediately. Did that, packed my bags, and went on deployment as soon as I finished CQ for the F-14.
Okay, so after the FRS or RAG, you're saying as a junior wingman, you saw combat operations in Kosovo?
Not Kosovo. So this was Operation. I'm trying to remember. It was Provide Promise.
Okay.
And then there was Deny Flight. So we did 3 operations on that deployment. So it was Provide Promise was initially. So it was UN support to no-fly zones in Bosnia. So we did that. We did a little bit of Southern Watch. Was a second one, Operation. Before the second Iraq War, where we enforced a no-fly zone, there was an operation called Southern Watch, where we kept the Iraqis out of southern Iraq, protecting UN forces down there. Yeah, all in my Top Gun squadron. He said I did go to Top Gun while I was an F-14 guy. Graduated from that course in the power projection course, which is not the same course that they teach now. They were developing the strike fighter weapons tactic instructor program in that time period. So right after I finished that. And then, the next tour was VX9. So we're looking for, I didn't even know what VX9 was really. Talked to the details like, oh yeah, they test new weapons, and you'll get a Hornet transition when you go over there. So I said, oh, that sounds fun. Tomcat was starting to be decommissioned. Clearly the future was not in the F-14 community, because that airplane, my squadron, VF-84, was decommissioned right at the end of my tour there. So I got about 6 months short of a full 3-year tour, and the squadron was decommissioned. So they sent us to other Tomcat squadrons. And since I was close to my first short tour, I went to VX9, and that's, segueing into how I got into the Super Hornet program.
Gotcha. Okay, so with your fleet experience, both your Top Gun tactics SME, we'll call it, as well as your combat experience there, right, with Southern Watch and whatnot, you definitely brought the operator's perspective into what sometimes can be considered kind of a clinical, I guess we'll call it, test environment, right? At least for me in VX31, I went after test points to make sure requirements were met. And just like you had said earlier, you guys then take it and evolve the story, if you will, and really put it in the context of the operators, right?
Exactly. So where I went, there were no Tomcats, right? So what I brought to the table was fighter experience, Top Gun graduate, and 2-seat experience, which paid dividends because we have a 2-seat F-18F, right? So that's kind of where my niche was, and timing, right place at the right time. I got to fly a brand new airplane, which I was just thinking today, hey, that's 20 plus years ago. Now the F-35 is in the fleet, but at the time, being involved in a program that's brand new, there were 7 Super Hornets in existence before the LRIPs came out. F1, F2, and then E1 through E5. So to be a part of that program and not being a Hornet guy was a really great opportunity for me as a young lieutenant. You go to VX9 from a Tomcat squadron. The standard is a Cat 4, right? So Cat 4, so you get 10 hours on an ATOPS check, right? So that's just enough to, be dangerous, right? So spent a lot of time, my first 2 years at VX9, learning the F-18, flying with guys like John Tunsis, gave me a lot of kind of one-on-one instruction. And we did a bunch of cross countries, bunch of air-to-air work, and I wrote the schedule. So I would pencil myself into any time I could get into an F-18 and fly it and learn something. You remember the gray books?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's how. I'm essentially a self-taught, other than the Cat 4, self-taught Hornet guy. All the systems I learned studying, just reading it out of the book, and then having the opportunity to fly those systems at VX9.
Nice.
Did you transition? Were you a transition guy from the Hornet?
Yeah, I was, and believe it or not, I started out at S3s and then went to grad school, came back, went to Charlie's F-18Cs, and then
Right.
I got, I think, honestly, 7 hours at the FRS, and then they sent me to my squadron as a DH, as a department head for my CQ in the Rhino. So trial by fire, we'll say.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a lot of the normal thing would be like a Cat 2, right? So from another platform, but that the FRSs just don't have or didn't have the throughput at that point to do that, and they had to prioritize other air crew that were like yourself going to department head tour, but you didn't get the Cat 2, did you?
I did not. No, no. I just, like you said, kind of a wing and a prayer, and off you go. Good luck, sunshine.
Yeah.
Don't hurt yourself.
That's a testament to the squadrons, though, right?
It is.
So they take care of each other. They got me the training I needed. I remember they sent me. I got CQ'd before the op eval of Super Hornet. I never got to take it to the boat, but I did get CQ'd. I got a bunch of air-to-air training, a bunch of air-to-ground training in-house with the air crew that were Hornet guys there. Definitely a good system to prepare you to do the job that they need you to do. And they never pushed you, beyond something that you weren't capable for. So, you don't start NVG low with 10 hours at an ATOPS check, right? So, but worked into the NVG program. We didn't have those in the F-14 back in the early 90s, but got NVG qual there. I eventually became a NATOPS instructor for the Super Hornet, and then trained all the other folks that came on after myself and Bill Ipock, Billy Ray. We were the first two VX9 guys to fly the Super Hornet.
Nice.
We became NATOPS instructors for the follow-on cadre.
Yeah, so Snake, kind of setting the stage here. So you earlier talked about LRIP, which is going to be your low rate initial production, right? So it's not a prototype, it's a step in the right direction. So it's going to be the first couple of models off the factory line, right? So can you set the stage for VX9? How many jets roughly you guys had? How many aircrew roughly? And kind of when big leadership, so when DC came down, or came over, I guess, and provided you with some instruction, what exactly did they say to you guys?
So to go kind of from the beginning, I think I mentioned earlier there were two Fs, if I remember right, F1 and F2. Those were the initial aircraft in the integrated test team in Pax River, at VX-23 hangars and over there. So we had those two jets, and then E1 through E5. So when we did OT2A, which was an operational assessment, I got checked out. I think I flew with Fred Madenwald, actually, who was one of the first guys, and maybe Broadway Prosy. But you get checked out, and they're okay. You're safe to fly this airplane. Obviously, we're already trained in the Hornet, but now we're flying the newest model of Hornet. And then we did kind of performance flights, mostly based around range and fuel performance. Out over the working areas at Pax River. So not really doing any tactical stuff yet. So there was just the two of us. So, this is a really, really important part. I think of the success of the Super Hornet was the construct in which they combined the DT and the OT, right? So back then they called it DTOT. Now they call it integrated test. But there was Dave Dunaway actually was embedded in that test team at Pax River. And he was there as a representative of VX9, right? So instead of, the old days where DT would work it all up, chuck it over the fence, to the OT guys, and then there would be discovery, not because the DT guys didn't do their job, but because they have a different mission, right? Spec versus operational significance, effectiveness, and suitability to be a fleet ready aircraft. So there would often be discovery in new weapon systems or new aircraft. But with the Super Hornet, that was all integrated right in the ITT. So there was a lot of awareness on the OT side. Of course, a lot of awareness on the DT side, and they shared all that information, right? And the guys that thought it up, and Dave Dunaway is one of those guys, was just genius, right? And it put the Super Hornet in such a great position to be successful because that information was shared, and they had a chance to work on those things together. I'm sure we'll probably get into wing drop at some point, but that was one of the things that there was no secrets about that because everybody knew what was going on. So, and they had a ton of support from the Navy. I mean, 100%. It was a very good time to be flying because it was fully resourced, whether it's from support aircraft or air crew, ordnance. I think every bomb we dropped was live initially, so it was all live ordnance, and then a lot of practice ordnance as well. But just well supported from the Navy as a whole, and it, of course, it's been a very successful platform for the fleet. So you asked me about a number of air crew. Started off with two of us. It was Billy Ray, IPOC, and myself. And then Dave Dunaway, decoy, was already at the ITT. Jeff Penfield Zoil, great leader, wound up being ComOpTev 4 two-star admiral in the future. His efforts on that program were instrumental in the success of what the Super Hornet became in the fleet. He wound up being the first CO, one of the first COs, and I think is that 115? I think VFA 115 out at Lemoore. So great people at the right place at the right time that work well together. And if we wanted something, if we needed something, we asked for it, and the Navy provided it, which made it very, very successful.
You had mentioned OT versus DT. You talk about DT being looking at specs, trying to make sure requirements are met. OT, at least when I was at 31 and I talked to my VX9 brethren, I'd always hear them talk about suitability and effectiveness, right? So can you talk about those metrics for OT, please?
Yeah, so it was essentially, back then there was, they call them critical operational issues. So effectiveness, can the airplane fight 1v1? Can the airplane survive in an air warfare environment? Can it drop bombs? Can it do close air support? How accurate does it drop dumb bombs, right? Those are the type of things that we were testing, but not just flying around in a circle, dropping bombs on Baker Range or Airport Lake up there, China Lake, but putting that in an operational context of, hey, we're a four-ship, we got to fight our way to the target, self-escort strike, transition to the air-to-ground mode, put the ordnance on target, note where our hits are, use the FLIR, then transition back to an air-to-air mode, and then fight our way out. Rather than looking at it just solely as, one specific mission area, but, the continuance of, the spectrum of an air-to-air fight, in and out of the target, and then getting back to the ship, getting gas, air refueling. So it brings all of the capability that is developed by the contractor that makes the airplane, by the weapons test and the VX-23s and the ITTs that make sure that the airplane is safe to fly, establish the flight envelope, flutter, vibe, carriage, authorized stores, store separation, all the stuff that builds up into making that airplane flight worthy, then, gets handed over to the VX9. So here's our baby. Tell us how much it kicks ass in the war environment.
Perfect. Yeah, I totally get it. So if the DT guys help to expand and define the envelope, right, the airspeed, altitude, operating envelope, do you also go out to the ragged edge of the envelope too during certain test events, or do you kind of stay in the heart based on the mission? How does that work?
Well, we will fly the airplane to the limits that were provided to us. So we don't do any type of envelope expansion. Right. But we'll take BFM, for example. So basic fighter maneuvers, 1v1, airplane versus airplane. Right. You know what the limit is. You know what your best rate airspeed and what your best corner airspeed is. And then sometimes it did get taken past the edge where, you run out of airspeed because you thought you could get over the top, but you couldn't. And then how the airplane responds, from a departure from controlled flight. Great segue. We did have a great test phase in Pax River where we did, just departure characteristics, and we compared an F-18B two-seat model to an F-18F, and we went out in the B, and we did high altitude, 40,000 feet, zero airspeed, tail slide departures, adverse yaw departures, and noted what the characteristics are in the existing aircraft, and then compared it to what the Super Hornet did. And to say the B was violent in some of the departures is kind of an understatement. It just was wildly, out of control as you're flying it to regain control, going through your procedures where, for example, a zero airspeed tail slide up at 40,000 feet, run out of airspeed, just start sliding down. You don't know where the airplane's going to go on its back or go forward, hit you with a bunch of negative G. The Super Hornet was very benign and just almost just wanted to fly, even that slow. I would characterize the differences in the way the airplanes departed it's phenomenal.
So let's talk about zero airspeed tail slides. I'm not sure the folks at home understand that. And you used your hands for me, which I get. So let's sit on the hands and just audibly describe a zero airspeed tail slide, which is, I think, epic for many reasons. I'll let you start, and then I might add some stuff. So go for it.
So the operational applicability is, you're fighting the airplane. So you're, the classic World War II, you're dogfighting another airplane, and you're trying to go up. Maybe you're trying to do a loop to come down, to get behind the bandit, but you wind up nose high and you run out of airspeed because you didn't manage your energy well enough to have enough to complete the new maneuver that you're trying to do. So you got the airplane parked pure nose high, pointed right towards the moon, and you run out of airspeed. All right. Well, the airplane won't fly anymore because there's no more lift going across the wings, right? So now it starts falling like a rock, right? So we would park the nose all the way straight up and then slide back down on the tail. And once that happens, you're taking your hands off the controls, and controls lead, feet, or throw, speed brake in. Remember those ones?
Oh, amen, brother.
And then hanging on for the ride, and then the airplane does its post-stall gyrations until it winds up essentially in a nose low attitude, and hopefully not inducing a spin by putting some rudders or some aileron in there. And then with enough altitude, you regain airspeed and you recover, right? You roll the wings level and you pull back up to the horizon. Well, in the B, that post-stall gyration was violent, right? In the F, it was very smooth. It pitched over in a very comfortable way and almost pointed itself, gently nose down for you. You put the power back in and you're flying again once you got the airspeed. So zero airspeed, tail slides.
Yeah, I'm so with you, Snake. So when I think of zero airspeed tail slides, I also think of the engine, how the engines are affected, right? So once the exhaust of the engine could, for a little bit, become the intake of the engine, right? Did you guys have any issues with either the B?
No. I like a Tomcat, that would be a prime condition for a compressor stall, especially in the TF30. But in the GE engines, I'm spacing on the nomenclature, never had any engine stalls at all.
Okay, so that's the engine performance. You talked about kind of what I call the inertial versus the aerodynamic forces. So with that zero airspeed tail slide, once Earth starts reclaiming and you're falling down kind of backward facing up, so the whole airplane itself is an inverted pendulum, right? So you got to think of a pendulum on a clock that normally swings with the weight down at the bottom. Well, now the weight is at the top. And now the weight eventually is going to swing around to the bottom. Mm-hmm. And as it does that, obviously the air is going to catch the wings, and then you get what you had called earlier post-stall gyrations, right? So we're talking about basically the aircraft does whatever it wants, right? You're still not in control.
Right.
And then at what point do you realize you're back in control of the aircraft?
So the normal indications are, any type of high angle of attack is broken. The airplane is no longer swinging wildly. And then the airspeed, going above 180 knots again, obviously you're in a nose low attitude, could be on your back, could be upright. But, once the airplane hits 180 again, you're flying again. And now you have control. You can roll the airplane to a wings level condition and then pull back on the stick to bring the nose back up above the horizon.
Nice.
So, but very gentle I use the word gentle. Probably somebody in the airplane would who's not used to that wouldn't call it gentle, but to me it felt gentle compared to the Bravo model. What's interesting about it is those same flight control laws that were developed for the Super Hornet were later put into the Legacy Hornet flight control prompts. I think 10.6.1, if my memory is right, which significantly enhanced the departure characteristics of the Legacy Hornet. So benefits from the Super Hornet put back into the Legacy. And there used to be 3 departures in the Hornet. You had an upright spin, you had an inverted spin, and you had the falling leaf. There were procedures for all 3. That eventually became just one procedure in the NATOPS. I'm sure you remember that.
Which is huge. And I think one of the great benefits of fly-by-wire, and you see it as early as the F-16, right, designed, I think, in the 70s. I could be wrong there. But it's going to be that your Super Hornet or Rhino, in this case, has the same sensors, same all control surfaces, if you will, the same motors that run that. What they do is they update the software, and they can update how the flight controls, or really the control surfaces, respond to the sensors, and they can tweak and kind of improve the software. And then I think that's what you got, where you said originally in the Legacy Hornet, we'll call it, you had 3 different modes, right, for spin, and then it basically converged because of software improvements to one spin mode, I guess, right?
Yeah, one departure from controlled flight mode. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Better way to put it. So So during these PSGs, post-stall gyrations, you ever knock your head against the canopy or your helmet, I guess? Or, what were you feeling like in the cockpit during these things?
So in the B, I'll use that zero airspeed tail slide. So imagine going from a pure nose high attitude, falling. So as it starts to slide back on its tail, try not to use my hands, but instead of going, in backwards, but you're falling forward, right? So now your face is going towards the ground, but it doesn't stop when you're 90 degrees nose low. It goes another 90 degrees past that. So the nose swings a full 270 degrees. So you get a lot of negative G there. So a lot of getting pushed up in the straps. We did another departure. I don't know the term for it, but it was just to 40,000 feet, slow, 200 knots, put a bunch of alpha on the airplane with the backstick, then push it back forward to zero alpha and fully throw one of the rudders left or right. So essentially blank out the tail, right? So the airplane swaps ends. I remember Zoil complaining that he smashed his hand reaching for the towel rack during the violence of that departure. If he ever listens to this, he'll remember that for sure. So yeah, you get bounced around a little bit, but you're strapped in 4 points, so it's what we do. It was really fun for me.
No, I'm with you, man. And so I did a high alpha departure in an F-16, and similar characteristics were inverted pendulum, and then obviously the pendulum weight starts to swing through the bottom, we'll call it the 6 o'clock position.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, the thing was actually rotating. So it wasn't in a true spin, but it was a rotating pendulum motion kind of thing that started at about 30,000 feet, and we finished up at about 16. So now during that time, yeah, I agree with you. Our training, we know what to focus on and when to focus so that we have indications of recovery, whether it be airspeed, alpha. All the time we're watching our altitude, right? Because that would be a timer for the ejection if we can't resume controlled flight. But would you say that our job has definitely ruined you for roller coasters and whatnot?
Well, what ruined me for roller coasters is the lines at the parks. So, yeah, no, I still enjoy them. I haven't been in a while, take the kids, but yeah, it's fun. People that choose this job do it because those are the things they like to do. Especially if you're a test pilot, you like doing those new things and making sure that it's that's going to be safe for the folks that come behind you to fly it. And that's your side of the DT with the envelope expansion. And then for me, that it's going to be effective when the people that come behind me take that airplane into combat, which they did.
I agree. So, okay, now thinking of the highlights of the Rhino OT here, what are some of the best flights we talked about out of control or departure, if you will, flights. How about just air to ground or maybe air to air missions and then some weapon releases? What are all of the highlights there?
Yeah, so we did the first live bombs for score that weren't just separation. So I'd never dropped a rock eye in my life, right? I had 10 on one flight, 10 rock eye, right? four Mark 84s, and not just one. You're dropping them in a stick on truck targets out at the Nellis test ranges. Key West, we did an air-to-air det in Key West, which is just a beautiful place to fly anyway, just with the scenery of the water down there. But a bunch of air-to-air missions. We did red flag at Nellis during op eval. Yeah, dropped a GBU 10. So yeah, we had I think 26 or 27 standard conventional loads that were allowed to be flown in the initial LRIP version of that, and we executed all of them in test, so a lot of live ordnance. Not one real hot really sticks out in particular because they were all really fun. Even tanking, guys who had not flown A7s who are now carrying the buddy store and learning how to, string that hose out for your wingman to pass fuel airborne.
Yeah.
So a lot of new things. I did a chase on with your old squadron. It was the ALE 50, right? So a lot of those flights were chased, as you know. So I'm flying not formation on the aircraft, but formation on the towed decoy, which was cool. Yeah.
And how big is ALE 50? Let's talk about that a little bit. So it's a decoy used for what kind of mission, and how is it a countermeasure? We'll say roughly.
Yeah, it's a self-protection jamming system.
that's strung out behind the aircraft, right?
Correct.
It basically, so it gets towed. We won't even say how far away for obvious reasons, but it drops down a little bit, and then so you're actually flying formation or photo chase
Yeah.
for the decoy itself,
Right. Because you need to look back, you need eyes on it to see what it's doing, right? And then obviously you can't land with it out there, so it's got to be cut in the location. You got to verify that the Super Hornet pilot, when he initiates the cut of the device, that it actually falls off the airplane. We don't want it hitting the ground as you're landing, right? So making sure that they're in the right spot when they cut that. So a lot of the Super Hornet test involved flying a chase aircraft, which is fun too, and observing that as other air crew are doing their test missions.
I'm with you. And I flew in VX-31. I flew some photo chase for weapon separation, or actually for live fires, if you will. So weapon sep is done obviously with VX-23 back in Maryland. But so now we're out in China Lake, and we're specifically to the west of LA over in the, we call it Whiskey 289, our live fire chunk of water that we use. And with photo chase, what we notice, there's a delicate balance between being too far away and not getting the video or photo snaps, right? And being too close and worried about it's basically swapping paint with whatever the test item is, right?
Right.
So are there any stories there of watching a decoy come out and any surprises, I guess, on your end?
No, I can't remember ever being scared or in extremis. I mean, the test conditions, the engineers that worked that really did their homework, and the air crew were very prepared for the events and had a lot of fun doing it. But when flying was business time, and everybody, my record was laser focused on executing the mission. I mean, just think if you're flying one of only 7 airplanes in existence in OT2A, and was a $700 million program. That's a lot of money in one airplane. So you take that seriously, and there's a lot of eyes on you, especially as a lieutenant, right? I can't think of another job that a lieutenant has where you're entrusted with that much value of equipment and that much responsibility. I've told a lot of people that, if you want to swing above your rank, go to one of the test squadrons, because you'll be an operational test director and you will own a program. You will manage that program in test. I mean, through the PMAs, obviously, you'll own your portion of that, whether it's DT or OT. You write the test plans, you plan the resources, you get all the ranges, and you write the reports. A lot of hard work and a lot of responsibility for young folks. And I think I was 30 when I did that. That's young, used to be.
Yeah. And I'm totally with you. So you bring up another great point. So you got your cadre here. You got your, I think you said 7. Did I get that correct? Aircraft.
Yeah, I can't remember how many LRIP we had. We had a smattering of E's and F's, 8 to 10.
Okay.
I'm sure Zoil will know exactly and remember their Bunos.
Right.
But yeah.
But it's a handful, and because of
Right.
the way manufacturing and technology works is because there's so few of them, they're very expensive per model because there's a lot of non-recurring costs that go into tooling the airframe, getting everything ready. So we'll just call it the prep expenses, right? So here you are, and the average age is somewhere in the 30s amongst the whole crew of you guys, right?
Yeah, most of the guys flying it were lieutenants. It's your first shore tour. Like I said, from varied background, Tomcat pilots, Rios, Hornet pilots, A6 pilots, and VNs.
And obviously, the report that you provide to the decision makers, the Navy leadership, very consequential because you're talking about the inaugural steps, we'll call it, of this program that's going to span decades, span millions into the billions of dollars. So, yeah, when you talk about just the responsibility that you guys had, both for safety of yourselves, the health and safety of the aircraft, but also programmatically, I mean, everyone's looking at you guys, right?
Oh yeah, a lot of pressure. There was some, there was a lot of naysayers, some at the, Congress, to be honest, who were not digging the idea of another aircraft that looks kind of like the old one. But I would just say they did not at the time understand really what the capabilities that the new airframe was bringing to the fleet, right? And the potential of the airframe, even from, the mid to late 90s where the Super Hornet was back then to where it is now, right? with the block threes, as you know, we're working on. But it was a lot of pressure, right? Some people wanted it to fail, right? I believe there's a lot of pressure to say things about it that are just glowing. And the great part about operational test is you're completely agnostic, right? You look at data, you evaluate the data, and you report on the data, right? And whether it's good, bad, other, that's the information that you provide, you provide to leadership, right? And, good news story, was recommended for fleet introduction and was introduced to the fleet. And it's been a very successful combat proven aircraft for the last 2 decades. I think we got it right is what I'm trying to say there,
Yeah, Snake, I agree, dude.
But nothing's perfect, right? There was issues. There always is. But the great thing is when there's an issue, especially with integrated test, you can say, hey, I don't really like this. What can we do to fix this before it goes into the fleet? And with that type of communication, those fixes are made early enough that it's not as expensive as it would be, if you get, 100, 200 airplanes into the line and you go, oh, this thing's really not good. I wish it was different. I wish we would have changed that.
Having our mantra at 31 was always to bring OT in early and often, right? To try to minimize those, whoops, we forgot about this, and now we got to implement it across many, many models as opposed to getting it early in production. So, Okay, so you talked about the pressures of your cadre, and I get it, and the programmatic pressures, but also political pressures. So are any of you guys getting weird phone calls in the middle of the night, or are admirals emailing you directly, or senators, or what kind of political pressures did you guys experience?
No, never anybody from, directly to us. We had great leadership there. Jeep Stivers, awesome guy, was the CO for most of the time I was there. And he and Dave Dunaway and Zoyle, they kind of ran, lead blocker for all that stuff and let us, lieutenants and lieutenant commanders do our jobs, and they screened most of it. I mean, I did get a phone call from Jeep one day that said, I need you to make travel arrangements to DC tomorrow. You're going to the Pentagon. Well, what for, sir? He's like, don't ask now. Just go get your tickets and then come up to my office later and I'll tell you what you're going to do. So there was high interest in the Super Hornet performance in a phenomenon it had called wing drop, where essentially the aircraft would have in certain flight regimes, certain angles of attack and maneuvering, it would get uncommanded roll one way or the other, right? So they spent a lot of time Boeing fixing it at PAX, and I had an opportunity to fly the fix, right? Before they had it fixed, there was that was a regime. Hey, you don't fly the airplane in this envelope because we have this known problem. So we stayed out of it. So I never experienced it myself. And then we tested that the fix that they had done, I mean, they experimented with changing the length of the leading edge snag, like little stall fences on the top of the wing. I remember there was some wood strip on the back of the flap. There was all sorts of things they were figuring out. And they eventually, crushed the problem with the porous wing fold fairing. I can't explain the aerodynamics to you, but I know that that's on the Super Hornet. And they wanted to know from the guy flying it, not the senior guy, but the junior guy, hey, you're going to talk to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff tomorrow, right? So that was a memorable moment, walking through the Pentagon with Jeff Penfield, Zoyle, meeting up with Admiral Baker, who was Optiv 4, going to talk to Admiral Nathman, who I think was N88, and then going into the vice chairman's office and sitting down with essentially 11 stars and little old Lieutenant Snake and talking about wing drop with a bunch of old pilots, and getting them to understand it, and not coming from an aerodynamics major, just, basically, the handling qualitatively, how I was able to execute the flights that I was tasked to do and not experiencing that wing drop phenomenon. So, yeah.
So Snake, you bring up a good point in that, okay, so let's say you're not classically trained in aerodynamics, whatever, but you lived it. You knew all about the intricacies, we'll call it, of the Rhino. And then you had to convey that to these guys who are decision makers. They got a lot on their plates, obviously. And you had to boil down the facts, right, to small digestible pieces so they could then present it up their chain of command, maybe up to Congress or the Senate.
Yeah, my recollection of it, there was pressure on the program. It's always fiscal pressure on every program. But if somebody who doesn't like it hears that it does something it's not supposed to do, especially in a critical regime of flight, that's kind of ammunition that an opposition could use to cancel the funding for the program, right? So again, just truth in reporting, right? I flew it. I flew before the fix. I flew it after the fix. I don't experience any controllability issues when I fly the aircraft in the full envelope that I need to execute the mission. My opinion, as Lieutenant Venema, is good to go, right? And I would take it into combat today if I could, right? And while there's no statistical significance to that like we have today, and I know you want to hammer on that with the way OT has changed. The opinion of experienced aircrew, and not just myself, but the whole rest of the team that flew it, that carries a lot of weight. And some things are qualitative, right? It's better if you can have, statistical significance, quantitative results, but, the opinions of the aircrew matter, especially when you're talking to leadership and people that really don't know anything about, strike fighter aviation.
Yeah, so before we get into the flight regimes where the wing drops occurred, if you don't mind, there's always this debate. And I think even today we see it with all of our tracking and our feedback loops of, how many stars do you want to give this person? So it's all quantitative, right? It's all about numbers. And those numbers can help people to make informed decisions. So we'll call it decision quality data. But it's this pull, it's a struggle between quantitative, as I just explained, and qualitative that you just explained. So it's going to be more of a personal assessment. It's subjective, but you guys have, and you personally, Snake, had the experience to be considered the subject matter expert. So qualitative versus quantitative. You talked about your experience with the Rhino and going in front of the 11 stars. Do you know then, and we didn't really focus on this much in your background, but you rose up to be quite a leader in OPTEV 4, right?
Well, yeah, my last job in the Navy, I was the Chief of Staff for Air Warfare at OPTEV 4, and OPTEV 4, Operational Test and Evaluation Force, is essentially the parent command of all the test organizations throughout the Navy, not just aviation, but surface, subsurface, cyber. So, as the Chief of Staff for Air Warfare, I managed for Admiral Penfield. Remember that name. So he went there, and I got a job with him later on in my career. Managed, the air warfare profile. So the follow-on test and evaluation that's still going on in the Super Hornet, H-18, H-16, H-12, right? So we're still working on new software improvements, the different weapon systems, presidential helo, SH-60, P-8, all the aviation components that are brought in as new capability to the fleet. So the admiral signs all of those reports that the squadrons prepare, and those get published. There's information for the fleet in there, as well as information for program managers of what their deficiencies are, stuff where they need to improve on future versions of the weapon system.
Would you say, though, through the eyes of Lieutenant Snake until Captain Snake, has there been a shift in focus from qualitative analysis to quantitative analysis?
I think so. So, I didn't mean to imply that we were only qualitative in Super Hornet OpEval, because we weren't. We collected a lot of data. We had some great engineers, some great statisticians that work with us, and we collected a lot of numerical data. But it's different now in operational test and evaluation. Now we have integrated evaluation frameworks, and we use a lot more modeling and simulation, and we use statistics to determine specific test points that we need across the envelope of the airplane or across the capability of an airplane, so that we can actually assign a number to it. Hey, the airplane is, 97% effective. I'm just making a number up, in this particular mission area, based upon the number of test points that you gather that, and then thrown in there with the statistical models that we use, right? And then we can say, well, it's not just my opinion that it's good or it's bad. It's also supported with the data, right? So that's the transition that OT has made over time. Hey, test is expensive. DT is expensive. OT is just as expensive. So if you can figure something out with, modeling and simulation, which also has its limits, or you can gain more information by flying an aircraft or a system. In this one particular regime, you can answer 6 questions instead of 1 question. Why not do it that way? So there's been a lot of effort put into operational tests, creating that framework. It's a requirement now. You have to do that, and it takes a ton of work. It takes months and months to put these frameworks together. So a lot of lead time, which makes me think of Agile, right? Which is why Agile is so hard in this environment, because it takes a lot of pre-planning and months of work just to develop the test plan, right? And then the reporting. So there's still some work to be done in there, in my retired guy's opinion, to find the sweet spot of how much test is enough versus how much speed to the fleet do we need, right?
Yeah.
We never want to give it up, right? Because if you give it up, then something winds up there and it doesn't work when you need it to work. So we don't want to relearn those lessons, but we also need to move faster, right? Which is the whole construct of Agile.
Yeah, exactly. Speed of the fleet, as you mentioned earlier, is kind of the buzz term, the moniker, whatever, or the mantra, excuse me. But then you also don't want to deliver crap to the fleet. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So there is this delicate balance between speed of delivery, we'll call it, and accuracy of product, or robustness, if that's a word, right?
I really try to choose my words carefully, because my opinion is that everybody working on this always tries to deliver the best capability that they can. I don't think there's any bad players in this entire system that try to push something off and not give the government its money worth. But there's so many variables that come into things, and there's so much discovery that sometimes things just don't work, right? And it didn't work not because of an awesome effort put forth by whoever's developing the system, but just things that weren't anticipated, technology that didn't prove to be as effective as they thought it was going to be, and then you adapt, right? And you either say, hey, this is good, or it's not good, or like, all right, it's good, but you can't do this particular mission area because it's not effective there, right? And then the next version of the software, we're gonna focus on fixing those deficiencies, So I mean, there's in the Wayback Machine, all the way back to DT of the Super Hornet. It's been continual improvement over the lifetime of this airframe, and it's been really amazing to watch it from the perspective as a lieutenant flying it to chief of staff of air warfare at Opta 4, and now even as a retired guy continuing to help develop technical documentation in my civilian job.
I am with you, and I think the management of the Rhino through the development, like you said, it's a continuous learning process, right? For how we can interact efficiently and effectively with the airframe itself. The aerodynamics seem to be very solid, I'll say very stable. And now it comes down to information exchange between the machines, if you will. So the sensors via displays to the aircrew, and whether you use color discriminators, or if you have something flash or something disappears and only appears at a certain time when critical. Yeah, so I'll call it the GUI, right? The graphical user interface.
Yeah.
Or a lot of folks call it the crew vehicle interface in our line of work. I think that's where the continuous improvement still remains. It's good, and they're just trying to make it a little more elegant, I guess, because we just have so much information provided to us, at all times, and we have to train ourselves as to when this information is relevant or important, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Back in 97, my initial training was on the cat's eyes NVGs. I don't know if you ever flew those.
I read about them.
Yeah. Considering a Tomcat that had no NVGs and having cat's eyes, huge improvement, being able to see in the dark. It's incredible. And then we got the Ambus 9s, right? And then we put the, Jehemics in the aircraft, right? Now you got helmet mounted display. So it's been a constant improvement of capability on that, that existing airframe. That when I see I'm over at the simulator building on Oceana, and I see the young aircrew coming through going to 106, and you see a little bit of yourself in them. But I think back to, wow, what a great time to be Lieutenant JG going through VFA 106 to be a Super Hornet pilot, with all the capability and so much more to learn, than those initial, 25 or 26 standard conventional loads that we had. back in the 90s. So yeah, it's been really awesome.
I'm with you. Hey, so if you don't mind circling back to, let's talk about some of the characteristics that didn't go so well, and that would be in the very beginning, obviously fixed. So when you had mentioned earlier the wing drop. So with wing drop, do you remember, was it more coming in, was it low and slow coming in for approach, or was it up high in kind of a tactical regime, or where did this occur?
So I never experienced it. Just to be clear, there was a known regime. I think it was combination of angle of attack, airspeed, right, where the phenomenon was present, where the lift was separated off the lifting surface, and you'd roll one way or the other, right, to varying degrees. Yeah, so they worked, like I said, they worked very hard to figure out what the problem was and come up with a solution for it, so that aircrew would not experience that in the fleet. Again, I wasn't part of the design process to fix it. Much smarter people figured it out, and then the DT guys tested it, and then called me back between the first operational assessment and the second operational assessment, if my memory's right, and then to go fly it in an operational scenario. Yeah, sorry, I don't have a whole lot of information on that one there, Shine.
Oh, no, not at all. No worries. How about the canning of the pylons? Were are you comfortable speaking about that? Were you a fan of them, or?
So it was, to my knowledge, I don't think they ever had a non-canted. At least I never saw one. So the pylons are canted out, so they're not aligned with the center line of the fuselage. They're towed out. They're canted out, and they're also towed out slightly. My understanding was that was done with computational fluid dynamics. That was to alleviate store-to-store collisions when stuff was released off the airplane, and in particular store to T-flare collision, on the left side of the airplane. So that was the solution. I think that came with a drag penalty, but I don't think it's any more than the thickness of the wing, right? So the Super Hornet was, we went from 9 stations to 11 stations, right? So we got 2 extra wing stations out of it, and we got a thicker wing that holds more fuel, right? And those come with performance penalties. So yeah, it's I would say subsonic. It's very fast to get to that transonic regime, and then it pays a penalty in the supersonic regime. Like anything, you make a bomb hauling truck out of it. That's nothing but drag hanging out there in the breeze, right? Which is why you see some of the modern airplanes with internal weapons carriage, right? So they can get the benefit of less drag and go faster, right? So it's not the super fast one. It certainly wasn't as fast as the Tomcat, right? And I would say a little slower than the Charlie, but you slick it off, right? Just put air to air stores on it, and you gain some speed out of it. Great acceleration down low, but yeah, it's certainly not the an F-15 air defense type of role, but that's not what it was designed for, right? It was designed, to be a multi-role fighter. And, when you strap stuff outside, you pay performance penalty. And I'm sure there's a performance penalty for the canted and towed pylons. I just couldn't tell you the math behind it.
Oh, no worries there. And the thing is, you bring up a great point that aerodynamics in general, really aircraft design, it's a series of compromises, right? You're not going to have the fastest, the highest, carrying the most payload, if you will. So it's the series of compromises, and that's when it comes to guys like you who are in the seat and have the real world experience as well as the tactical prowess of being a Top Gun graduate. You can provide that feedback to the engineers and help weigh decisions, right? Weigh decision making, I should say. So when it comes to, how often are we going to be in this regime where the canted pylons are going to add additional parasitic drag, we'll say, or add additional drag that's going to preclude mission effectiveness. And I think, although, we'll kind of in the ready rooms, we might joke or bellyache about the canted pylons that are kind of accentuated when we have those external fuel tanks on. And
yeah, it's very, very noticeable.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah, it's totally, you're like, okay, that's obvious. But I would rather have that than have to worry about, if I'm releasing a stick of weapons, so multiple weapons at the same time, I don't want them bouncing off the bottom of my empennage, right? So
right. Think about the extra pylons, right? So in my fleet deployments in the F-18C, Lot 15s, Lot 12s, I mean, we flew double ugly.
Yeah.
Right. That was right. So you put you got a centerline fuel tank and you got one on the right wing, right? In the Super Hornet, you have all that extra internal gas. You can execute that same mission with just a single center line and bring more bang to the fight because you got extra pylons out on the wing. So it's really not an apples and apples comparison until you look at how you configure the aircraft operationally, like a standard deployment, and then you can compare who brought more farther ordnance, impact into the air war game, targets on the ground.
Not there are many naysayers out there, but if there were about specifically the cannon pylons, it's not like some guy just, he forgot to do the math and woke up the next day and said out of haste, we're just going to do it this way, right? There are a lot of eyes on this. It's a very methodical process, a lot of risk management, a lot of just all mission planning factors really assessed. So it's, it was a group decision when you say it's not just a slip up of one individual, if someone were.
That's correct. And it was absolutely supported with the aerodynamic data. So you get, here are your COAs, right? I can put the pylons in this configuration. I can straighten them out, right? I can have less pylons. I can have different leading edge snag. And all those things are carefully weighed and measured and done with consensus, not necessarily at the OT side, but on the DT side, and on the Boeing side, to have the best performance out of what they have.
Totally with you. So, all right, are there any other characteristics of the Rhino that were debatable or had to be modified during OT?
If I remember right, I think we had a problem one time with wingtip stores with the vibe out there. So went flying one time and then couldn't take the weapon off the wingtip. Essentially had fluttered itself and fused to the rail. And yeah, they changed. My recollection is they changed some of the attachment lugs and fixed the problem.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, discovery, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So you're on a voyage of discovery out there, and some things that you can't, that M&S, right, modeling and simulation will not capture.
Right.
One of those, we used to call it low cycle oscillations. So we saw it on the F-16. You put a certain amount of weight out on a wing. It's at a distance, so now you have a moment arm, correct? You got a weight out there at a distance, and then you got air flowing over the distance, or the wing, really, right? So you start these vibrations. The vibrations lead to oscillations, so it's basically the wing flexing up and down, but not enough to go into the, dare I say, the deformation. It doesn't get deformed, so it doesn't go in the plastic region. If you guys are into that, it's more elastic, right? So it's going to snap back to its original shape, but when it snaps back, that's when the lug nuts and the interfaces start to get jammed, right? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
Okay, yeah.
And there were just things about the design of the airplane. So the leading edge extension, it's farther back in the Rhino, right? So you can see better, right? You look out the edge of the cockpit, you can see better, but it's worse in the back seat because it's wider, right? So the Wizzos in the back pay a penalty for the wider legs, the pilots in the front, and even things like the ladder, right? They're different spacing, and it was slick. This is a great example of just man-machine interface, climbing up, getting into the front seat on that narrow Lex. The initial stuff, I think they had like walnut stuff cracked in there under the paint, right? And it was very slippery, right? And if you look on the new Super Hornets, there's some proper, effective non-skid up there, and the spacing of the ladder was different. So if you're used to climbing out of the cockpit, throwing your foot down at night on the ship, looking for that first step to get out of the airplane, that step is different, right? And some people fell off the airplane, and we're like, hey, okay, so we talk about, hey, the Lex is small, it's different, it's slippery, be very careful getting in and out of the airplane. And then, right, we identified a problem. They came up with a fix, and they put proper non-skid up there. So, yeah, just one more lesson learned. I think Felix took a spill off the airplane.
Oh,
yeah.
That's the thing is we always think of flight regimes: high, fast, low, slow, coming into land, whatever. But even a regime of operations, just getting into and out of the damn thing, right? So for case in point, check this out. So we are. I've done the Charlie. I flew the Charlie did a deployment in the Charlie and all that stuff. And now I'm at the RAG. So I'm basically in VFA 106 East Coast. And I'm thinking, wow, this shiny new plane, I get to fly. It's going to be awesome. I climb up the ladder, and Snake, the first thing I did was bang my shin on the Lex because it's wider, as you're coming up the ladder and then trying to get on the Lex. So here I am thinking this is going to be a stunning machine. I'm excited to fly it. And the first thing I do is just smack the snot out of my shin. And it just it almost ruined the experience for me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But remember, then they put a switch in there, right?
Yeah.
The electrical switch to bring the ladder down instead of having to reach up and hit the two latches. So it's, creature comforts, which brings me to a great point, which I haven't mentioned yet, the maintainers. Okay.
Good point. Yeah. Let's talk about them.
Yeah. So the VX9, the weapons test, they were called weapons test, I think, back then, and then became VX31. But all of those maintenance experts, they had to learn a whole new platform, right? So they went to school. And while we're learning and documenting the flying characteristics and the operational effectiveness, those guys are collecting a ton of data on the suitability, right? So, suitability is the standard triangle of availability, reliability, maintainability, logistics, supportability, right? With availability being the top of the stool there, and they all contribute to that. So they're collecting all that data. How easy is it to swap a box in this airplane? Right? How easy is it to fuel it? How to jack it up and different size, different support equipment. And then what were the failures that we were seeing? We collected every code that we could on every flight, all the maintenance, status codes, all the radar codes, the BOA codes. And they were collecting all that data fastidiously through every single flight that we did. So while we were briefing, flying, and debriefing, they're getting the airplanes ready. They're doing the maintenance on the aircraft. They're documenting the maintenance. They're documenting the pros and cons of the new system. So can't say enough about the initial cadre of maintainers that supported the test. They're true enablers.
Absolutely, Snake. And interestingly enough, the VX, at least when I was there, VX31 maintenance, they were contract, right? So they're civilians. They could have been former military or retired military. And now they work via government contracts. There's different rules, different regulations, still not dealing with the aircraft itself, but the administrative part of their job, right? Whereas you guys in VX9, you're using tried and true enlisted sailors, right?
Correct.
So it's more operationally representative when it comes to that triad you mentioned for suitability.
Correct.
So which is a huge difference.
Because that's who is going to be doing the work in the fleet, right? We don't have a contract force. I mean, we have a lot of contract support in a lot of different areas within the government, but out on the flight deck, that's sailors.
Yeah.
Right. And in the squadron, it's sailors. So.
And those sailors they could be on a flight deck, they could be on a ramp in China Lake or, at the airfield in China Lake. They could also be in Key West, right? So humidity, temperatures, all those stuff can affect not only performance, specifically, you and I kind of think of the engines, right? But also just the maintainability. What if you get some moisture behind a panel and then you seal the panel, then it goes up to altitude and it freezes, right? There's all these second and almost third order effects that come along just with environmentals and how a human can maintain a machine.
Exactly.
So,
and they're walking up on that slippery Lex as well. Right. So you got to train them. You've seen them, working on the gun out over the nose of the airplane, standing in the cockpit. It's a very challenging environment for them. They do great work.
Yeah. And then speaking of challenging environments, so the VX9 obviously had at least one carrier suit. I'm assuming you call it that, det, right, on a boat.
Yep.
So yeah, just that environment is crazy. So, all right, Snake. So big picture wise, so we talked about your background, what you brought to the table, which was a lot. How much onus they put on you for responsibility for reporting responsibly, I guess, to decision makers on this multi-million then billion-dollar program that spans decades. So when it comes to lessons learned, what were some of your takeaways, if you can remember them from your lieutenant days, for VX9 and just Rhino OT in general?
The biggest thing for me was the teamwork. I mean, it sounds cliche, but I mean, when I look at the folks that were the first 100 folks that flew that aircraft from the DT and the OC side, it was a team effort all the way, and you can't do any one thing by yourself. We all worked. That was pretty much a year of 12-hour days. Especially Scott Tingle, he became an astronaut, probably the hardest working guy I know in the Navy, and still today. I learned a great work ethic from being on that team. I learned the importance of supporting each other, the importance of being factual, right, and just telling it how it is, right? And that's always best, right? Tell me the bad news early, and then it's and then we fix it, because you can't make everybody happy all the time. But lasting friendships came out of that. It was a great springboard for a lot of careers. A lot of folks went very far in the Navy. Admiral Dunaway, Admiral Penfield, two great examples. Mongo Sears, I haven't mentioned him yet, another great dude. Give you the shirt off his back, And then how to write reports, right? How to convey information to somebody who doesn't really know what you do. Right. So to the civilian authorities that are the decision makers and the purse strings, how to explain to them so that when people read, DOT&E gets it and they present it to Congress, that the information is clear and concise and people understand what it does. Right. And then just the stuff I learned there, learning to fly the Hornet at a test squadron and then becoming a department head. It's like, oh yeah, I dropped a JSAL already, in tests, I dropped a GBU-10, and those experiences helping other people in the fleet who may not have had an opportunity to do that. Say, hey, here's how it works. Right. And by the way, here's a great reference called the Grade Book that you can use, and you can read all this stuff. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
You did, and I'm going to add a little bit to it. So you brought out all these accolades of the other team members, and Snake, I know you, so I get your personality, very commendable, very respectable. I look up to you extremely. But your career also, you know what I'm saying? And I know, for the folks at home, Snake is he's one of the guys you'd meet at a bar and you never realize he's a retired 06 that has all this experience, because he doesn't wear it on his sleeve. You don't brag, right? But I mean, your career too. I mean, you ticked pretty much all the boxes you wanted to. It sounds like to me anyway. I mean, just was it 30 years?
Great career. Yeah, 30. Yeah, I retired in 2019. I'm lucky, right? I wanted to be a pilot when I saw the Blue Angels when I was 6 years old at Willow Grove with my dad, right? So lucky guy, got to do it. They were flying Phantoms. Can you believe that?
That's awesome.
Phantoms, and I saw them in A4s. So I knew what I wanted to do. I was lucky enough to be in a country that let me do it, and there's a bunch of us, but in the big scheme, not many. Most people are humble about it, and I that's what I like. I like the humble professional.
Yeah, me too, man. Just I think it's the way to go. Just kind of put your nose down to the grindstone, and carry it out, because our jobs are very I guess different story now that we're retired, but very demanding, and just kind of this humble excellence is required of everyone. So to say one guy is ace of the base and another guy is barely getting by, I just feel that it was not the case. It's just such an elevated skill set, and especially in the fighter community, the personalities, right? I think you just learn, you have to be a social creature, because to me, at least in my squadrons, and especially in test, where we have these ill-defined problems of we don't know exactly what we're going to run into, right? It's a group effort. So cooperate to graduate, whatever you want to call it. So
yeah,
I think we share similar lessons learned, we'll call it, both in communication, as you mentioned earlier, and how to effectively communicate to someone who doesn't have your skill set or your experience, but they're very consequential when it comes to purse strings. So I think that was good. Snake, what do you do now? What's your job now? What are your hobbies? You have some free time, I'm hoping. What do you do?
Well, I work with you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm a post-retirement. I was very lucky. I got hired by a company called Tactical Air Support, and I document technical capability in publications called NATIP. So technical information publications, naval aviation. So I keep my toes dipped in the fighter world, and in other platforms with helping to write documents and training that, air crew who are currently in the military can read and understand and use these weapon systems effectively in combat. So I love the company. I've been there for 3 years. I hoping to go through until I retire for permanent. Yeah, hobbies. I like to play guitar. I'm a fighter pilot that wants to be a rock star. But yeah, no. So I do that, and kind of a homebody. I like being at home. Cliche. I got a garden now,
Nice.
right? Well,
But also being a PA boy, you're a hunter, aren't you?
a little bit. Tried a little duck hunting here. It's been kind of slow during COVID. But yeah, I like going out. I mean, yeah, people go, "Oh, you're going to shoot a bird?" I'm like, "Yeah, well, I'm going to eat it when I'm done with it." But I like being out in nature. I was a Boy Scout as a kid. I like being out. The best part of duck hunting is sitting in your friends pre-open time where the sun is coming up and the sky is purple and it's cold, and you're kind of quietly telling stories and just having fun. That's good for me.
I agree.
I did want to bring up one thing. When you're talking about squadrons, I think one of the strengths of the military is accountability, right? We're accountable to ourselves. We're accountable to our squadron mates, and we don't shy away from that, right? I mean, every flight is debriefed thoroughly, and there's no slack for not hacking it or messing up. Not that somebody's going to yell at you, but you're expected to know your job. You're expected to perform. You're expected to learn everything, and that goes from the most junior guy to the CEO of the squadron. Right? Everybody gets debriefed, whether it's your landings at the ship, and that's standard. I think the whole country could take a lesson from that, right? To have a what I would call a thick skin, accept constructive criticism on things that you're not doing right and ways to improve, because that's how you get better, and that's why we always win when we go out there, because we're ready.
I'm with you. So Snake, once again, thanks for your time, man, and the stories and just the experiences. And you really helped the Rhino DT just come alive. The Rhino OT, my apologies, to come alive. So any parting shots?
No, this was fun. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to scrape the dusty section of my brain, and just brought up a lot of good memories and a lot of fun times I had, and people that I haven't talked to in a while. So I'm probably going to have to get the cell phone out and say, "Hey, I just was talking about you the other day." So if I said something you didn't like, you can have at it. I'll take accountability for it.
There you go. Yeah. All right, Snake. So throughout your entire Rhino OT experience, did you have any kind of severe emergencies, any kind of oh crap, moments where you thought you're going to eject or catch on fire? Tell me about your experiences there.
Not once. It was like driving a brand new car, right? So never had to break out the PCL for some emergency that I felt the airplane was in extremis. There's probably some cautions and lights that came on that were just nuisance lights, but it was a very very safe airplane to fly, and had no problems with it. Kept that PCL in the G suit pocket most of the time.
And that's a testament to the design engineers as well as the maintainers, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, nice. Okay, dude. Well, cool, man.
Yeah, hey, that was fun. I enjoyed it.
Good. I did too. Just a trip down memory lane, right? Like you said, the Wayback Machine.
Yep.